Welcome to the Create Your Story podcast, with conversations on creativity, self-leadership and personality to inspire and support your wholehearted life. I'm Terry Conlon, author, creative transition coach, teacher and personality type practitioner. Before we begin today's episode, I'd like to pay my respects to the Dharawal people, the traditional custodians of the land where I'm recording this podcast, and extend that respect to the traditional owners of lands across Australia and to elders past, present and emerging. You can find the episode show notes, your free copy of Chapter 1 of my book, Wholehearted, Self-Leadership for Women in Transition, and lots more information at quietwriting.com. Now settle back and enjoy today's show. Welcome to this episode of the Create Your Story podcast. I'm thrilled to be speaking today with my friend Kerstin Pilz, whom you might remember featured in episode 2 of the podcast as part of the first Wholehearted virtual book launch. Kerstin and I connected via social media and have had the joy of meeting up in 3 continents and countries, including when I joined Kerstin for her first writing and yoga retreat in Hoi An, Vietnam in September 2018. We chat about retreat, the value of incubation in writing, Kerstin's memoir in progress, and much more. But first, a personal update and something you might like to be part of. As I speak, it's the 12th of December 2021, and the Wholehearted Self-Leadership Book Club is open for enrolment, with the first orientation session coming up this week on the 15th or 16th of December, depending on your time zones. This is a year-long, actionable community read of my books, Wholehearted, Self-Leadership for Women in Transition, and the Wholehearted Companion Workbook. So if transition is a big theme or focus for you now and into 2022, it will be a powerful, value-packed way to do the work of transition over time with accountability and community, and to make space for the deep shifts you desire. It's part book club, part group coaching, and a transformative reading experience. So head to the book club links in the show notes transcript on Quiet Writing, or the links in my Instagram bio where I am at Writing Quietly, to find out more and join the fabulous group of women gathering. Now to introduce today's guest. Kerstin Pilz PhD is a published author, former academic with almost 20 years university teaching experience, a TEDx speaker, and a 200 RYT yoga teacher. She is currently completing her memoir, Falling Apart Gracefully. Her previous publications include academic monographs and travel features in the Sydney Morning Herald, the Australian and the New York Times, and travel industry magazines. When tragedy turned her life upside down, she discovered the healing power of writing and now teaches creative writing online and on multi-day retreats in her beautiful home in Mission Beach, far North Queensland, Australia, and in Hoi An, Vietnam, where she lives part-time. Kerstin and I met via our mutual interest in writing and living a creative life after a more academically and teaching-focused career. Kerstin was a retreat host in Vietnam for the fabulous retreat I attended while writing Wholehearted in 2018, and is also a Wholehearted Stories author with her story, Grief and Pain Can Be Our Most Important Teachers. Today we'll be chatting about transition and turning points, shaping a self-directed creative life, writing as a source of healing and growth, the experience of being a TEDx speaker, and also the experience of writing her memoir, Falling Apart Gracefully. There's so much wisdom in this chat, and I'm excited to share this conversation with Kerstin with you today. Enjoy listening. Hello, Kerstin, and welcome to the Create Your Story podcast. Thank you for your connection, your support of me, Wholehearted and Quiet Writing.
Thank you, Terry. I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you so much.
So we've connected around creativity, living a self-directed life, writing, and so much more on our journey together. We've even met in 3 continents, in Frankfurt, Hoi An, and in Bundina, where I live. So it's so great to be able to share the insights from our conversations and our connections today. Can you provide an overview for people listening about your background, how you came to be where you are, and the work you do now?
Okay, thank you. Well, where to start? You'll probably be wondering along the track what my accent is, so I'll start with that. I'm German, and when I was 8 years old, I thought I want to be a writer. I just loved the idea of creating stories. But then, of course, life happened, and I moved to Italy and then eventually to Australia, and I couldn't write in either of those languages as a novelist or a writer. So I went into a different career. So I taught literature for many years at university. And I actually ended up doing a PhD in Italian studies on Italian literature. And then life change happened for me, and I realized it's a turning point that necessitates perhaps finally actually also going for what I've always wanted to do, and that is write full time. And so that took a few stops and starts, copywriting, travel writing, teaching at university. And eventually I created Write Your Journey. And the idea is I'm sharing the tools with my community that helped me heal after a very difficult life event. And writing had been my tool. I call it my lifesaver. So personal reflective writing. And I'm also at the moment finally coming to the end of my draft of my memoir about these events called Falling Apart Gracefully.
Incredible. So it's amazing how many similarities there are in our stories, and often, we often find the themes that we both relate to align. One thing we've both shared is a major transition from a long-term career, in your case, a career in academia, to a more creatively focused life. So can you describe what that transition's been like for you, how long it took, and the main turning points? I know that's a big question too.
It's a big question, and it took a long time. I sort of felt at age 48 when basically what triggered my life change was that my husband got sick with cancer and then he passed away. And I realized it was such a profound experience. I felt like, okay, a portal had opened up. I'd gone through a portal, and it was time to become somebody new as a result of that experience of going through grief and so on. So it wasn't as straightforward as I had hoped it to be, and it took a lot longer than I had envisioned it. So basically, I decided to leave a tenured university position as a head of department, which was a big choice. And most people thought I was crazy and I would regret it. I mean, who lets go of excellent superannuation, a lot of time, paid leave that you can spend at home to do your research and to write your papers. But I no longer wanted to write in that voice. And I'm sure I could have perhaps within academia explored other ways of using my voice in new, more creative ways. But it also had to do with the fact that I no longer wanted to teach Italian, which was the language that my husband and I had spoken. And so I think it took me a long time to actually come to the point where I was writing my own book, because I had to first process those events. So I turned to travel writing, and that was very exciting. I actually moved to the Maldives for a year. I worked there at the university. It was a DFAT funded appointment. And then I stayed on and I became a travel writer. So I would say I honed my writing in many different genres until I finally reached that point where I was ready to write that memoir. And I love writing it. It's not giving me a lot of income at the moment, but, I'm happy. I'm happy to be living in my passion and not making much money, but I can live very frugally. I used to live in Vietnam, as you know, for 4 years, which made things easier. And I loved living there. It was a great community. But then COVID happened and I remained stuck here and the borders closed. So that was, in a way, a blessing in disguise, because it has forced me to stay in the one spot. I can't travel, as you know, the borders are closed. So I said to myself, well, let's write that book. And yes, I'm very happy to say I've been extremely productive on that front.
Oh, that's fantastic. And it's incredible to hear your journey through from academic career to where you are now and the twists and turns. And I can certainly relate to your point that what you think is going to happen or what you plan to do and what happens are often two very different things. So in your Wholehearted story on quiet writing, you share the story of how grief and pain can be our most important teachers, and you've touched a bit already what happened in your life that story is about. So what did you learn from moving through and on from such difficult times?
Oh, yes. Well, my difficult times, and I have said it publicly in my TED Talk, so it's not a secret. My grief was complicated by the fact that I found out virtually in the same week, if not actually on the same day, that my husband, when I found out that he was terminally ill, that his cancer was incurable, I also found out that he had been unfaithful to me, serially unfaithful. And so my world fell apart, several times in that moment. And so what I learned from that, and that was the moment when I had to make a decision. Do I leave him? And of course, it was not clear whether he had 3 months or 5 years. The doctors kept saying, we don't know. It could be 2 years, it could be 3 years. So the decision, do I stay or do I leave? That was a real turning point for me. And in order to reach that decision, I did something unusual. Most people probably wouldn't do that. I locked myself away in a 10-day silent Vipassana retreat. I remember my best friend saying, are you sure you want to do that? What if you have a breakdown? The monks are not trained to help you if you have a meltdown. I said, it's fine. This is a conversation, a very deep conversation I have to do on my own terms. And I feel that Buddhism can give me the tools to actually understand what it is I have to do, namely let go and cultivate compassion. And I think this is where I sort of, discovered the wholeheartedness paradigm, if you like, is do I close my heart and leave this man and say, all right, that's it, you're on your own. Not that he would have been on his own. He had a family and he had his daughter and Italian family, and close my heart and perhaps become bitter, drink too many glasses of red wine just to close that chapter? Or do I take the other choice, which is a much more difficult choice, and I stay with this man who, of course, he also wasn't like in the movies, repentant. And I had sort of imagined that moment where he goes, oh, look, sorry, honey, it happened. I'm very sorry. No, it didn't happen that way. It was actually much more brutal. However, the choice was, do I keep my heart open? Do I use this as an opportunity to evolve and to grow? Or do I choose the other option, which could very well lead to me becoming a very bitter and twisted old lady? So I'm grateful I took that choice. So that's the first thing I learned, to actually embrace the person who hurt you also as your, most important teacher. I mean, it's a sort of banal and simple thing to say, but it's super important, I feel. Secondly, it gave me that feeling of being invincible. What else can happen to me? And in fact, as you know, 10 days after the funeral, we had a major Category 5 cyclone, which was billed as Australia's largest cyclone in living memory, destroy my beachside town, and in fact landfall not far from my veranda. And so what I learned is that you're actually more resilient than you think, the inner resilience. And the other thing I learned, and this was shocking, is that our Western society, first of all, unless perhaps you are a Christian, but most of us are secular or even atheists, we don't have any rituals to deal with death. We don't have any sort of protocol or any comfort around grief. In fact, I found it very shocking how people judged me, how people told me, get over it already, it's been 5 months, how people felt uncomfortable to even mention the topic. So that was an incredible learning. And that's where much later I discovered Brené Brown, who says it so eloquently, the truly brave are those who allow themselves to be vulnerable, because it takes courage to feel all those messy emotions. It's much easier to run away, to numb your pain. Not that I didn't try that, of course, as well, but those emotions will always catch up with you in the end. So that's another very important thing I learned, that if you're over grief, you get through it. And if you give yourself to actually get through it on your own time, in your own time and on your own terms, it's a much deeper healing. At least that's what it was for me. I'm sure there are people who do it in different ways and equally feel healed, but that was what happened for me.
Yes, and from the experiences I've been through, obviously quite a different set of circumstances, but resonates with me. With what you're saying is that we would never wish for these circumstances in any way, shape or form, but when they do happen, there's an opportunity for us to dig deep. And that idea of creating our story, or as you say in your lovely TED Talk, being in charge of the stories that we tell, I guess that Falling Apart Gracefully, to your beautiful memoir title, we do fall apart in a way, but what's the rebuilding process too?
Yes, exactly. And in fact, I did pitch this to an agency. Said, I don't like the title because you want the rebuilding part in there as well. I said, yes, that goes without saying. In fact, I had thought about it as never waste a good crisis, because really it was an opportunity to use this moment to actually learn something really profound. And of course, the other thing you learn when you are in the face of death, and especially of a loved one, is the preciousness of your own life. And that moment when you say, I'm no longer going to remain stuck in a shadow career. I am now going to go for what I really have been wanting to do, because I could drop dead or, have a cancer diagnosis tomorrow. You just don't know. This came completely out of the blue for us. We were about to head overseas and go on a adult gap year and had everything planned. It was basically the eve before our departure that this happened, that he got ill.
Yeah, it's just amazing how life can change so quickly. I think that's something too we learn from these experiences, and to make the most of every moment. So tell people what your life looks and feels like now, because it's obviously through all of that moved on to something quite different.
Yeah, so it took a long time. I did a lot of detours. I did a lot of things. I kept thinking immediately the next year, you have to be productive. You were head of department. Now you have to quickly do something else. So I took on a voluntary position, a very onerous, as a director of a film festival. And I realized that wasn't actually what I was meant to do. So it was a long process of figuring it out. Right now, my life looks like, well, the best thing was for me to decide to rent my house out on Airbnb. I'm lucky enough I can do that here. It's a beachside community. And to start again in a completely different community. And that was Hoi An in coastal central Vietnam. You've been there. It's a wonderful place. And I did yoga teacher training in Nepal in 2016 when we decided this. I have a new partner now, I should say. So that also happened. So that's lovely. It can happen. You can have your life back even after difficult things happen. And in Hoi An, I set up myself as somebody who teaches and shares the tools that help me heal, and yoga, meditation, mindfulness, journaling, and of course also creative writing. And so I used to teach it in workshops in Hoi An. And I built up my online platform. I do also teach these things online, although at the moment I'm focusing exclusively on getting my own book written. But the main thing, and I really enjoy this, is holding those retreats. You were at the very first, in fact, in Hoi An, and we were only a very small group. And now with COVID, I have shifted them to Mission Beach because I literally got locked out of Vietnam. All my things are still there. And I decided, well, let's do them in Australia. And of course, there's a lot of demand. Lots of people want to do these retreats. So we have 5-day retreats where people can really get into their manuscripts, into the body, finding the stories they're holding, and just use the time to write.
Beautiful. It's just amazing. I love that your business is called Write Your Journey, and what you've done is really create and shaped a beautiful journey, through incredibly challenging times. So it's really inspiring. So while we're talking about retreat, and my experience of being on retreat with you in Hoi An, Vietnam, was such an important part of my journey in writing my book, Wholehearted. And one thing I've come to realize is the value of incubation in writing and retreat, especially in hindsight when I look back over the 4 years of writing my book. So what would you say is the value of retreat as a writer, and what experiences do you create as a retreat leader and host?
Yes, so I think the value of the retreat is really giving yourself that stretch of time where you're away from your family, away from your work, from your desk. I encourage lots of offline time because you really want to slow down and become present to those stories inside of you that are dying to be told. I also, of course, offer guidance on how to tell a story. So and I tailor these retreats to the particular group. So one time, people wanting to write nonfiction books. So, we focused on that. The last retreat, we had people wanting to focus on short stories. So we did a lot of emphasis on that. And I think the value is that you have the opportunity to really get into the flow. And I noticed this also with writing my own book. If I give myself a long weekend alone, without a partner, without anything else, you really stay with the story. And often the benefits come rippled through you even much later. So I think rest and retreat. I've actually realized this when I was in Thailand for that Vipassana retreat I mentioned. It was at a public temple. I was the only white person there. It was all local women, mostly women. And they said to me, well, we do this once a year. It's sort of, they didn't use the word self-care, but basically the idea is, as a Buddhist, you'll work on your inner transformation. You're constantly working on yourself, and you should take regular retreats to deepen that inner work. For me, when I was still working, we got 20 days paid leave, which is not very much. And I always thought, why would I spend those days of leave on retreat, like let's say meditation retreat, for not speaking? I always considered it to be a waste of time, and I've changed my mind 100% on that. It is the best investment you can make for yourself.
That's beautiful. And in terms of the experiences you create, I know that the retreat I went on was a blend of yoga, writing, but also getting out and about. And for me, it was very much about sharpening my senses too. I know in Hoi An, we went to the local markets and we bought the food. We went back and we cooked it and we ate it. And it was actually very rejuvenating.
Yes, actually. And you will remember, I think maybe it was even on that morning when we went to the market, we used the Buddhist concept of beginner's mind, see the eyes as if you see the world through fresh eyes, as if you're seeing it for the first time, which in a foreign context like Vietnam, where everything literally is foreign and new, is easy. It's part of the experience anyway. But we also do that very actively here in Australia. And of course, for most people coming up from Melbourne, let's say, Mission Beach, which is very tropical, is also like they're going overseas. But to actually consciously focus on seeing things for the first time through a beginner's mind is a really good lens to use as a writer. Yeah, like you say, it sharpens your skills of observation.
Yeah, and I think it's about a reset. We can feel quite jaded, and I think that taking ourselves out of our normal day-to-day routines, it's just totally refreshing.
Yes, and also you do it with a group of like-minded people. I sometimes have very small retreats. The one that you came on was very small. Sometimes I have larger ones. And of course, inevitably you get, people from every personality type imaginable. But the thing is, you're there because of your shared passion and your shared drive to actually do that slowing down. And that can be very nourishing. The synergy that is created, even those of us who are introverts will really benefit from that exposure to others who are on a similar journey.
Absolutely. I found that to be the case. So in October 2020, you presented a TEDx talk on the healing power of writing, which is incredible. And we'll put it in the show notes and encourage people to watch that talk. Can you tell us about that experience, which I'm sure must have been quite nerve-wracking, why you chose that topic and how writing can help us heal?
Okay, so that's 3 questions, I guess, but that's great. I love talking about that experience. So first of all, the experience was just very random. I got stuck here, borders closed, and I was like, okay, what do I do next? And so just coincidentally, actually, it was somebody who came to a retreat. She also went and presented, and she mentioned it to me. The deadline was like the next day, and I thought, okay, I'll give it a shot. Choosing a topic was very easy because the healing power of writing is sort of what I do and what I would like to think my business is about. And the tagline to that actually is, you are the author of your own life. So you can write the next chapter. So my narrative, my story that I had set up for myself, being based in Vietnam and doing what I do in Vietnam, I had retreats scheduled that year, which of course had to be cancelled, is turn a page at any moment and write another chapter. And especially as long as you keep in focus that you don't want to be the victim of any circumstances. You want to actually be the hero of your own story, claim your own story. So that, I thought, has to be the message. And especially given that this was, of course, the first year of the pandemic and we were all a bit in shock. What's happening here? So I thought it might also be a really good time to share that message with the world that, hey, we're all going through this very difficult time collectively, but there is one tool we all have available to us 24/7 at the cost of pen and paper, and that is self-reflexive writing. So, and then to the logistics, the event was in Townsville, which is local, so it was a 3-hour drive. I was very lucky that the person who organized the event, Joanne Keon, she teaches public speaking at the local high school there in Pimlico, Townsville. And she offered some coaching sessions and for free. And I thought, of course, another skill. Why not? So I actually went and met with her a couple of times, and she really helped me tell it as a story that draws the reader in, the listener, the audience. And the difficult part was that other famous TED Talk speakers, but even the not so famous ones, generally get a year lead up time. We had, from finding out that we were accepted to the actual night of the presentation, we had just under 1 month, which was extremely scary. But in a way, it was a blessing in disguise, because it meant my focus for 1 month, and I was by myself because my partner was stuck in Vietnam, was to get this talk written and rehearsed. And because you don't get a teleprompter, you actually have to learn every word off by heart. And I've written a blog post on how to prepare, because I learned so much from this experience that I thought it might be useful for others to share. But one of the things I'd like to say is it really taught me that it's okay and it's important to own your story, to claim your voice, and to feel confident stepping in front of an audience and saying, here is my story, and this is the reason I would like to share this with you. And then to tell your wobbly knees, just keep me straight, because I have a very important message to share with the world. And my knees obeyed. I mean, I was quite impressed by myself, how well I did, considering that I had a bright light shining right into my face. I couldn't look at any notes. I had to have memorized every word. We had a time limit, and if you go over the time limit, we were told it will not upload it to the TED site, so it will be disqualified. But we had no way of seeing a timer. So in other words, you have to rehearse it, not to the second, but basically you have to feel very comfortable with the pacing. The other thing I did, if anybody here is thinking of doing a TED Talk, I rehearsed it. Well, I said it out aloud to myself in every context, in the car, doing the dishes, going for a walk. But I also rehearsed it with live audiences, just to see what happens if somebody coughs and you get thrown and you go, oh my God, I've lost my spot, and you go blank. Or if somebody drops a glass, which happened, you just keep going. And nobody will know if you skip a sentence or paragraph, because they haven't read your script, so they will not know. So you just keep going. And that was very helpful. And it was a great experience in itself to make me feel more confident about it's okay to claim your voice. So anybody thinking about it, I encourage you to do it.
Oh, that's fantastic. And that idea of owning your story and claiming your voice. And I think, it's the same in writing, but it's probably another step, particularly if you are a writer, to then, as an introvert, which you are, I am, perhaps many people listening may well be also, you have to really work, I think, to claim your story and to really share your voice is another step. And it takes, like all these steps, hard work, hard inner work, learning the skills and being able to move through that process. So congratulations on that. And thanks for sharing your learning here. And also in that blog post, again, we can pop that in the notes, because I think there's just so much learning from that experience.
Yes, there's a lot to be learned. And that's how I prepared, just reading lots and lots of blog posts, how other people had done this. Yeah.
That's great to hear. So your memoir you're currently writing is called Falling Apart Gracefully, as we've discussed. So how are you finding the writing process yourself? I guess that, longer term, longer haul writing process is quite different, isn't it?
Yes, I knew what I was going in for, because I have done a PhD and I had it published, as is required when you are an academic. And so I knew it was going to be a long haul. However, I stalled because this is, of course, not a research project. It's not fiction. I'm not making up characters and give them funny lines. This is actually about me and what really happened. And also, of course, you need to tell it as a story that is interesting, that has tension, that moves the reader forward, is a page turner. That would be the ideal way to tell it. And I'm aiming to do that. So I think very good at teaching things. I'm often very bad student of my own teaching. But one of the things I would say, and you know this yourself, is journaling is a wonderful practice for any writer, maybe even just simple things like morning pages, to train the writing muscle, to become more comfortable in your own voice, to write faster, and to lose that fear of the blank page, because you can just start. And I often do that when I'm struggling to get into a chapter. I might just journal and, maybe 3 pages, and then halfway through it's like, that's where I start. And you find it. So it's a process. And for a long time I approached it perhaps like I would have approached a PhD, researching, thinking, planning, scheming. But with my memoir, it doesn't actually work that way for me. It's really a process of discovering the thread of the story as you write it. And then once you understand how to tell that story, I've chosen the 3-act model. I've obviously read heaps of memoirs, but once you have found that structure, then you can make an outline. And then you sit down and you say to yourself, I'm not writing my book today, I'm writing scene X. And if I have 20 minutes, I can still write a very rough draft of scene number 25. And then maybe in the evening after dinner, I might have time to polish it a bit further. And then the next day I have something that is more solid than if I hadn't sat down to do that. So choose the little pockets of time you have, choose them well, use the Pomodoro technique, which I know you use, and just trick yourself into being productive. What works for me, and I never thought this would be the case, is to have a very strict routine. I always was, the rebel routine. That's for boring people. Well, I've changed my mind on that too. And for example, one thing I do is I combine it with exercise. So like this morning, I get up at 5:30 in the morning. I'm a morning person now, which is another surprise. I do my physical exercise because that also teaches me, like I might struggle, I don't know, running up the hill because I'm not that fit. But if I do it, for 10 weeks, I get better. And that is a mirror to my writing. It's the same thing. I might struggle to write the first draft, but if I keep doing it, I will finish, I will get better. So have a routine, have a system that works for you, and then just do it. Focus on it. Obviously, I speak to a lot of aspiring writers and I hear it all the time. I would love to write a book, but I just can't do it. I haven't got the inspiration. I'm waiting to be inspired. Inspiration will not come. Like Danny Shapiro says, put yourself in the path of inspiration every day. Or like Dan Brown says, sit down and write every day. He writes even, I think, on Christmas Day. I think he takes one day off a year.
So much about mindset. It's about practices. It's about self-belief. Believing you can do it better. But a lot of it is just that step-by-step, day-by-day, that idea of just getting our butt into the chair and doing the work is a big part of it too. But all those things can come together, can't they, to also self-sabotage, when our minds play tricks. Our inner critic tells us, what are we doing? We've got to, have an income somewhere along the way through all the work that we do. But it's a huge learning process, that whole journey of writing a longer haul piece. So yeah, congratulations.
Thank you. Well, I'm not where you are. I'm not there yet, but I like the idea. What you just said is an evolution, because that's what it is exactly. You grow as you write that thing and you get so much clarity. With a memoir, of course, you do want a little bit of distance from the story because you don't want to make it a whinge or revenge story. And for me, this is now 10 years after the event, I have so much more clarity, and it's no longer a story about my husband. It's a story about my rebirth, how I re-emerged from this situation. The other thing I will say about the process, something to maybe help your listeners if they are on that path and wondering how to do it, I find it very, very helpful to also have a support group. So don't show your writing to your partner, your best friend. They are not going to be your best critics, because they'll either feel uncomfortable to say something negative or they'll just praise you because they love you. So have a group that is your peers, a writers group. I had a writers group that I ran for 4 years in Hoi An, and then the borders closed and we kept going for another year via Zoom, but it became too complicated. But now I have a small group, 3 of us, we meet once a week and we critique and read each other's chapters. And since we started that, I have made huge progress. So that is a really good thing as well to do.
Absolutely. That's one thing I've really learnt on my journey too. We often think of writing as just us with a pen and paper or computer, but my light bulb moment was when I wrote my acknowledgements, and then there was just this cast of many, many people involved in the community of writing that book in many ways. So whether it's feedback, support, just that ability to talk about what you're going through, I think is so valuable.
Yes, exactly.
So, shadow career. In my book, I talk about shadow career, and I know that you have also been running some workshops recently around the idea, and that is a concept talked about by Steven Pressfield in his book, Turning Pro. He uses examples like being the roadie when we actually want to be the musician, or being the teacher of writing when we actually want to be the writer. So I know this concept's resonated with you in recent times. Tell us more about your thoughts about the shadow career and how it might be playing out.
Well, exactly like you just said, do you want to be the writer, but I'm the writing teacher, And I think you and I actually connected initially by both reading Pressfield. I mean, the penny dropped like 6 years or whenever it was, 2016, when I first started this idea of Write Your Journey. And I read Pressfield in The Shadow Career, and I thought, oh, yes, I've been a university lecturer teaching literature and dissecting it and writing papers on different authors when I really wanted to write my own book. And I had always taken the excuse, well, my English wasn't good enough. It was great for writing academic stuff because that can be a different way of writing. But I wasn't yet confident enough to write in a more lyrical, prosaic way, although that was just an excuse. And so the shadow career, it's a form of self-sabotage. What I've also realized, it is, in my case, for example, it's an inheritance of blockages, of trauma. Like my mother, and I say it in my TED Talk, the biggest gripe in her life is that her parents, growing up in post-war, being born into Nazi Germany, and then, afterwards, after the end of the war, they were too poor to send her to high school. So she has remained in this narrative that she is the dumb one in the family, the one unworthy of an education, and she didn't have the tools or the ability to break out of that narrative. So the shadow career is, like you said, the roadie, or the roadie who drinks himself into alcoholism thinking I'm a musician, but really you're not. So it is so easy to remain stuck in those shadow careers. So then what I did is I started Write Your Journey, which I thought was a clever idea, and it is. However, it actually meant I spent a lot of time setting up my own website, which I loved. I actually really enjoyed that experience of learning new skills in that way. And then ended up teaching writing to others. I think the penny finally dropped when I was reading your book again the day before your virtual book launch. And I thought, there is somebody who came to my retreat. She's finished her book. We're launching her book. Where's my book? And she talks about the shadow career. And that's when I thought, okay, that's when I wrote to my community and I said the monthly Zoom writing sessions that I hold live, they will be on hold until I finish my book. And so the last one I held last weekend was on the topic of shadows. And it was incredible. It was such a great topic to use because, of course, we all live with these shadows and we need the shadow. To be whole, we actually need the shadow. And if you're writing fiction, your character needs a shadow to be interesting, but don't remain stuck in the shadow career. Claim your own career.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it's great that you're able to share your insights with your writing group too, and the light bulbs probably to go off for different people, because you're right. That's, again, something I reflected on in writing my book, that we need the shadow, but we need to make it more conscious.
Yes, that's what Carl Jung said, making the shadow conscious. That's the work.
Yeah. So we were chatting just before we came on live about how our themes and our stories are often very, very similar. My podcast's called Create Your Story, and you talk in your TED Talk about being in charge of the stories we tell ourselves. So it's obviously a strong theme for you. So I'm really interested for you to tell us how you've created your story over your lifetime.
So I think it comes back to that tagline I mentioned earlier, you are the author of your own life. So, I'm a high school dropout. I dropped out of high school when my English teacher in Germany said, you will never learn English. I said, right, I'm going to show you. Actually, I didn't think that. I went off and I worked in a hospice of all places at the age of not even 18. And in those days, it was the 80s. They didn't have the training and the work health safety that we have now. In Germany, this was. And so the things they made us do, it would be illegal these days, lifting bodies and so on. But it taught me so much. And it also forced me to sit with dying people and to be, for the first time as an 18-year-old, in the presence of a dying person was extremely powerful. And it made me realize how precious life is, how it's actually a unique opportunity, because also a lot of the people in that old people's home were very sad. They had wasted their lives, and that has to do with, historical circumstance and poverty perhaps. But it was a much deeper teaching than high school would have given me at that point. And so I have stayed true to that dictum that I now have, that you are the author of your life. So I did eventually go back to high school because I knew an education would be important, but I did it on my own terms. I actually worked in a restaurant. It was hard. I never went to any parties because I was always working on the weekends, but I was in charge. I was the one in charge. Perhaps this has to do with the fact that I was born very far away from the ocean and in a cold and gloomy place, not too far from the border with what used to be East Germany. It was during the Cold War. It was very gloomy. Very gloomy. We were an occupied nation. We had American army forces around us. You'd hear them training every day with their tanks and machine guns. And that risk of Cold War lingering, it really shapes your psyche in some ways. So I worked hard, saved a lot of money, and I discovered Italy. Sunshine and la bella vita, la dolce vita. And so that's when I realized you can, unlike my mother, who has remained stuck, I was the dumb one. I never was allowed to go to high school. You can change your life at any moment. And so that's what I've done. I've realized I can actually live in Italy. So I lived in Italy for a while. Then I lived in Bali in the 80s before anybody did yoga there. And eventually I ended up in Australia. And so what was the question again? How I shaped my life.
Yeah, it's about how you created your story. And I think, the way that you're seeing that is reminding yourself constantly that you're the author of your own life. You've also used the word self-directed, which again is a word I love too, that idea of we have choices. We've talked about luck versus choice too. Luck plays a part in life, but sometimes we can overly put the emphasis on luck. And I talk about your lovely blog post that influenced me in Wholehearted. And I think we need to just focus on that hard inner work that we can do to make change.
Yes, and actually that, now that you mentioned that blog post again, that was really important to me to share that with the world. And I'm really grateful that it resonated with you and others, of course, because often I get people say, how lucky are you? You're living in Vietnam. How lucky are you? You're working from home. Yeah, well, I rent out my house on Airbnb. I often camp so that I can rent it out. Not everybody would want to do that. Not everybody would want to go to Vietnam and set up new and live on a small budget, but have the benefit of that self-directed life. So it wasn't luck, it was hard work and determination and staying true to my values.
Absolutely. So in all of that, you've learned so much about wholehearted self-leadership. So you've read my book, some of the tips that I have recommended from my experiences. I'd love to hear about yours. What are your top tips and practices?
We share the personal journaling as a way of staying connected, of honing that inner compass, and also of just unburdening yourself, saying the things that you're afraid to say, because that's the other thing, where the fear is. Go near the fear. And if you're writing fiction, go near the fear, because that is where the energy is, Same for a memoir. Tell us the things that you are most scared of. So confront your fears. Don't bury them. Don't try to outrun them. I tried that for a while, but that doesn't work. And other practices, mindfulness, of course. After my stints in various monasteries, I even received teachings from the Dalai Lama. Not just me, there were 300,000 other people. I did develop a regular meditation practice. I'm a little bit slack at the moment. And when I do slacken up, I realize it. I just feel a little bit more disconnected from myself. And also I feel less relaxed when things become stressful. And for me, what's really important is also to get enough sleep. Very important, not to be undervalued as a superpower. And well, I personally also like yoga because I feel it's a mind-body. It's a holistic approach to life and to your own well-being. And to allow yourself to rest, to get out of that. I have to produce in order to be valuable to society. I need to show that I'm constantly busy, that I have to-do lists that are impossible to get through. No, it's okay to rest. It's okay not to be productive. Like Bronnie Ware in her book, The 5 Regrets of the Dying, says, what do people regret the most when they die? Well, I didn't spend enough time with my family. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Those are some of the things. I'm sure the minute we stop this podcast, I'll think of something else.
Yeah. It's great just to hear what's front of mind for people and what comes to mind immediately. And I love those tips and practices that have served you well. So thank you so much for sharing about your life, your work with Write Your Journey, and particularly your deep learning over time and the hard inner work that you've done through challenging circumstances. Thank you for sharing them today, and also through Quiet Writing, which is much appreciated. And through my connection with you, I've gained great strengths from our connection, from your work and from going on retreat with you. So thank you for that. So if you can let people know, Kerstin, where they can find out more about you, about your work online.
Yeah, and thank you, Terry, very much also for creating this community where you actually have met a lot of people online through you, and that's wonderful in that community. So my website is writeyourjourney.com. You can just contact me through the contact page if you want to get in touch with me. I run regular retreats, and one day I might even have a podcast, but for now I also have a Facebook group where I post regular writing prompts and motivation articles I find and so on. And my aim going forward with my business is to actually, because my passion now is, you just have to stay with your passion. And I've realized my passion is memoir. I never thought that would be the case, but it's just such a powerful tool, because even if you're not planning to write it as a book, sharing and writing your life story just brings so much order and clarity. And so I'm hoping in the new year, when I have finished my book, brought it to a point where I can back off a bit, is to actually have a memoir writing group or a program or something like that. That's sort of a long-term plan. So, and on Instagram, of course. I love Instagram. I'm not that active at the moment because I, get lost in social media, as we all do. But since I live in a beautiful place, or when I lived in Hoi An, I just love taking photos. It's another passion of mine. And so Instagram, it's Write Your Journey.
Oh, thank you. And your photography is always so beautiful. It's lovely to see all the amazing places where you're living and writing from. It's such a joy. So thank you so much. We'll pop all those links in the show notes. And thanks for chatting with us today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Terry. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening today, and I hope you found it inspiring and supportive. You can find the episode show notes, get your free copy of Chapter 1 of Wholehearted, and find out more about my books, coaching, and other offerings at quietwriting.com. Connect with me on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, where I am at Writing Quietly. Please leave a review on your favourite podcast app too, to help others find the show and create their story. And warmest wishes for you as you create your story in the world.